On a humid Tennessee morning in the summer of 1943, a German soldier stood beneath the shadow of a wooden barrack, turning a glass bottle slowly in his hands. Inside it, a dark liquid fizzed and shimmered in the light. He had crossed deserts, survived hunger, and marched under the banner of an empire that promised triumph. Yet nothing on the battlefields of North Africa had prepared him for the quiet shock of tasting a Coca-Cola. To him, that sweetness bordered on the unreal, a luxury that war was not supposed to allow. Only weeks earlier, he had fought in a world defined by scarcity. Hard biscuits passed for breakfast. Ersatz coffee kept men awake through sandstorms. Food was strategy, and hunger was a constant companion. But here, behind the fences of an American prison camp, he found shelves stocked with candy bars and ice cream sold for the price of a nickel. Everything he had been taught about American weakness began to unravel with each sip. And so a question emerged, one far more powerful than any weapon on the battlefield. What happens when a man raised on sacrifice confronts a nation built on abundance? They had come from a very different war. In May 1943, as the Afrika Korps collapsed in Tunisia, nearly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers laid down their weapons before the advancing Allied forces. Many of them were veterans of the desert campaigns, hardened by months of deprivation and unbroken heat. They had marched beneath Rommel's banner, pushed the British across Libya, and lived through a war fought on sand and supply lines. Yet, even as they surrendered, they carried with them the grim certainty that capture meant suffering. Nazi propaganda had warned them that Americans starved their prisoners, that captivity in the United States would be a slow death by neglect. Their first hours in Allied custody shattered that belief. Instead of punishment, the men received American K-Rations. These small khaki-colored boxes, the same ones U.S. soldiers often complained about, were revelations. Crackers that did not crumble to dust, processed cheese that tasted impossibly rich, candy bars wrapped in bright foil, instant coffee with real sugar tablets. For men who had spent months counting calories, this was not a meal, but a feast. It marked the beginning of an education they did not expect. As the prisoners were processed through temporary camps in North Africa, the surprises multiplied. Military records describe breakfasts of pancakes, syrup, eggs, and milk served to enemy soldiers. Foods that had vanished from German rations years earlier appeared here without ceremony, offered to defeated opponents. The contrast was unmistakable. The Americans were feeding prisoners better than the German army fed its own men in the field. When the Liberty ships arrived to transport them across the Atlantic, the lesson grew sharper. These vessels, mass-produced at unprecedented speed, embodied a scale of industry the prisoners had never imagined. One new ship every 42 hours. Holds packed with supplies. Refrigeration systems running day and night. And aboard them, the German captives received rations equal to or greater than the crew's. Fresh bread, meat, vegetables, and coffee served with milk, a luxury most Germans had not tasted since before the war. But nothing challenged their assumptions more than the ice cream. Several ships reported serving it during the Atlantic crossings. 10-gallon batches, churned in steel machines, offered to prisoners as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. To men who had last seen ice cream in their childhoods, this single detail was almost incomprehensible. On the open ocean in the middle of a global war, their captors gave them a dessert that Germany could not reliably provide even in peacetime. By the time the ships approached Norfolk or Newport News, many prisoners no longer feared what awaited them in America. Instead, they stared out at the coastline with a dawning realization. They were entering a nation whose strength did not lie only in weapons or armies, but in something far more disorienting, a capacity for abundance so great that even its enemies would experience it from the moment they surrendered. What awaited the prisoners on American soil was not a single revelation, but a series of shocks, each more disorienting than the last. Their first steps into Norfolk Naval Base offered a sweeping view of a country whose industrial rhythm seemed to pulse beneath every steel crane and storage yards. The base covered more acreage than many German cities, and the volume of cargo moving through it each day surpassed what major German ports managed in an entire week. For the men who had marched across the deserts of Tunisia, this was not merely infrastructure. It was evidence that the war they thought they understood had been fought on uneven ground from the very beginning. In the port exchanges, they encountered another surprise: rows of candy bars stacked freely on shelves. Hershey, Mars, Nestle, names they barely recognized but would never forget. Each bar cost 5 cents, the same price paid by American children. The idea that sweets were so common that even dock workers bought them casually contradicted every story they had been told about American decadence and instability. Here, abundance was not a privilege. It was routine. Their journey inland reinforced the lesson. Instead of cramped cattle cars, prisoners traveled in passenger coaches. Dining cars served full meals. Fried chicken, vegetables, pie, and coffee poured freely from silver pots. What astonished them was not the quality of the food, but the realization that they were not receiving special treatment. These were standard meals served to any civilian traveling across the country. In Germany, such service had been restricted to officers and elites. In America, it was simply how trains operated. Then there were the prison camps themselves. Camp Crossville in Tennessee, Camp Hearn in Texas, Camp Shelby in Mississippi, each one built with electric lighting, heated barracks, hot water, and flush toilets. The Geneva Convention required humane treatment, but the Americans went far beyond that baseline. Barracks were insulated against the winter. Medical staff conducted regular checkups. And in the camp exchanges, prisoners found something that would become a symbol of their ideological undoing: Coca-Cola. For 5 cents, the same price as candy bars, a man could purchase a bottle of the fizzy drink he had first encountered with disbelief. American guards explained that children bought it daily with pocket money. Work details saw vending machines in factories, gas stations, schools, places where Germans would never expect to find luxuries. The scale was staggering. Many camps received hundreds of cases each week, delivered with clockwork regularity. Technically minded prisoners marveled at how every bottle tasted identical, whether in Maine or Texas, proof of a standardization they had believed German industry excelled at. And then came the summer celebrations. At Camp Shelby, men gathered to watch hand-cranked ice cream makers turn ice and salt and cream into gallons of frozen dessert for Independence Day. The simplicity of the ingredients made the result no less bewildering. Germany rationed sugar to civilians by the gram. In America, the kitchen staff discarded hardened sugar by the sack and simply ordered more. For the prisoners, this was the turning point. Not the ice cream itself, but what it represented. A society so wealthy, so confident in its productive power, that it could share luxuries with enemies in the middle of a global war. In those moments, many of them realized they were witnessing more than hospitality. They were witnessing the full force of American industrial might, expressed not through weapons, but through everyday life. By 1944, the German prisoners no longer needed lectures or pamphlets to understand the imbalance between the two nations. They could see it with their own eyes. Assigned to labor details across the American heartland, they worked in orchards, canneries, and sugar beet fields. What they witnessed there was more than efficiency. It was a scale of production that their homeland, still clinging to ration books and shortages, simply could not match. In Michigan, they harvested cherries destined not for survival rations, but for maraschino garnishes placed atop ice cream sundaes. Tons of fruit grown for decoration left many speechless. At the Del Monte canneries, they watched workers reject perfectly edible peaches in pairs because they were too small or uneven in color. Back home, those same fruits would have been treasured, not discarded. Records from 1944 show that 15% of fruit was rejected for cosmetic reasons alone, much of it sent to animal feed. The prisoners could only stare. This was not wastefulness for its own sake. It was a system so confident in abundance that it demanded perfection from its products. Sugar beet fields in Colorado and Nebraska revealed a similar truth. Single farms produced more sugar than entire German regions. Mechanized harvesters cut, lifted, and loaded beets with a speed that surpassed anything in European agriculture. For the prisoners, many of whom came from farming families, the message was unmistakable. A nation that could produce such quantities of sugar could also produce the weapons, fuel, and machinery needed to sustain a global war. Abundance was not indulgence. It was the foundation of American power. And then came the number scold, undeniable, printed openly in American newspapers. 7 million tons of sugar, 5 billion bottles of Coca-Cola, 500 million gallons of ice cream, military chocolate procurement running into hundreds of millions of pounds. The United States produced more food, more sugar, more dairy, and more consumer goods while fighting a global war than Germany had managed in peacetime. Every figure confirmed what the prisoners had already sensed. Their defeat had been sealed long before they set foot in Tunisia. The reversal in 1944 and 1945 made the truth even sharper. German prisoners began sending food parcels to their families, using camp wages to buy chocolate bars, canned meat, instant coffee, and other goods. The International Red Cross recorded more than 11 million parcels shipped from prisoners in America to civilians in Germany, an inversion so profound that many families wept when they opened the packages. Their sons, held in enemy captivity, were eating better than they were in freedom. By the time the war ended, the physical evidence spoke for itself. Many prisoners returned to Germany heavier and healthier than when they had been captured. Their families, weakened by years of deprivation, could not reconcile this with the propaganda they had been fed. The contrast was too great. It rendered the old ideology hollow. And for the prisoners themselves, the transformation was irreversible. They had entered captivity believing in German superiority. They returned home knowing that the true measure of power was not domination, but the ability to create so much abundance that even enemies could share in it. To American planners, the treatment of German prisoners was never simply an act of generosity. It reflected a deeper strategic conviction about the nature of power in a democracy. The United States understood that its greatest strength was not only its army or its factories, but its ability to produce enough for everyone. Abundance, in the American view, was not a luxury, it was a stabilizing force. If citizens, soldiers, and even prisoners could be fed well, morale would remain strong and resentment would not take root. Scarcity bred extremism. Plenty discouraged it. Within the War Department, this philosophy shaped policy. Commanders believed that treating prisoners humanely would reaffirm the moral purpose of American soldiers, many of whom came from farms, factories, and towns that valued fairness even in conflict. It also aligned with Geneva Convention obligations, but in practice went far beyond them. Feeding prisoners generously was a way of demonstrating the confidence of a nation that did not fear its enemies because it knew it could outproduce them. International observers noted the contrast. While Germany rationed sugar to its civilians in tiny monthly allowances, American camps placed bowls of sugar on mess hall tables without restriction. Foreign diplomats visiting the United States during the war often remarked that the country seemed to operate on a different economic plane, capable of supplying both a global army and a vast home front while still maintaining consumer markets. In this sense, the treatment of POWs served as a living exhibit of the American system. It showed that democratic capitalism could generate not only weapons, but well-being. The long-term effects on Germany were profound. When the war ended, hundreds of thousands of former prisoners returned home with first-hand knowledge of how the American economy functioned. They had seen mechanized agriculture, standardized factories, and distribution networks that moved goods across thousands of miles with astonishing consistency. More importantly, they had experienced the social consequences of abundance, where class mattered less, where opportunity seemed wider, and where even the smallest town displayed a level of material comfort unimaginable in wartime Europe. These men would become unexpected advocates for partnership with the United States. Their testimonials softened political resistance to the Marshall Plan and helped German citizens understand that American aid was not exploitation, but extension and offer to rebuild a society on principles that had already proven their strength. In many ways, the seeds of West Germany's post-war economic miracle were planted not in boardrooms or ministries, but in the mess halls and PX stores of American prison camps. In the years that followed the war, the memories carried home by former German prisoners became more than personal stories. They became quiet testimonies to a different understanding of power. Many of these men returned to a homeland reduced to rubble, its cities darkened and its people worn thin by hunger. Yet, in their minds lingered the taste of something almost unbelievable. Ice cream served on a hot American afternoon, a cold bottle of Coca-Cola opened without ceremony, a chocolate bar that arrived not as a reward, but as an ordinary part of daily life. These fragments of memory stood in stark contrast to the bleakness that greeted them at home. For their families, the stories sounded impossible. How could a nation at war fighting across oceans, supplying armies on multiple continents, offer such generosity to its enemies? But as West Germany slowly rebuilt, the truth of what the prisoners had witnessed became clearer. America's great strength had never been its ability to conquer. It had been its capacity to create, to produce, to distribute. A society that could hand ice cream to prisoners during a global conflict had discovered a form of power that went beyond strategy or ideology. It was the power of abundance, shared without fear. Over time, the symbolic items of their captivity became part of Germany's new cultural landscape. Coca-Cola returned in 1949, followed by soda fountains, ice cream parlors, and eventually supermarkets modeled on the American style. These were not mere consumer goods. They were reminders of a revelation, that prosperity could be democratic, that luxuries could be common, and that dignity came not from domination, but from opportunity. Historians would later argue that this transformation, rooted in everyday experiences rather than political directives, was among the most effective reorientations of a defeated nation in modern history. The men who had once marched under the banner of the Third Reich became witnesses to a different kind of world, one where power was measured not by scarcity, but by the ability to provide. And so their story leaves us with a question that echoes far beyond the barracks and prison fences of the 1940s. In a world still shaped by conflict and ideology, can abundance, fairness, and simple human generosity remain forces strong enough to challenge extremism? If you have your own reflections on this chapter of history, its lessons, its contradictions, or its echoes in the present, I invite you to share them below. And if you value these journeys into the past, consider joining us as we explore the battles, decisions, and turning points that continue to shape our world.